All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of our Green Buzz Agency webinar series. With all that's going on in the world right now, we especially thank you guys for joining and spending this strategic lunch hour with us. My name is Andrew Whipp, and I am the lead creative here at Green Buzz Agency. And I'm also joined by my good friends and colleagues, Tara Wilson-Jones, our VP of Marketing and Development, and DJ Jamiel, one of our associate producers here. How are you guys doing?
Great, excited to be here and welcome everyone who's joining us.
Yeah, looking forward to this one. Today we are joined by a major leader in the world of digital, somebody who we cannot wait to hear from. But before we get started, if our audience members ended up here and don't know who we are or what we do, Green Buzz Agency is a full-service video production company. We're based in Washington, D.C. and specialize in documentary, motion graphics, and branded content, and of course, virtual production. So if you or your teams are curious about the process of making a video or are looking to tell your own story and add video to your marketing and communications mix, then please do not hesitate to reach out to us. But bringing it back around to today's special episode, this is Green Buzz Agency's first ever Fireside Chat, which we're launching as an extension of our webinar series. And this episode's a little different with the cameras on and an interactive format to accommodate everyone's questions. So given that we've done 20 episodes with over 40 panelists, if you'd like to check out any of the previous episodes that we've done, please feel free to visit greenbuzzagency.com/blogs. There you're going to be able to see a ton of on-demand recordings of all of the episodes we've done, which include strategies and ideas from executives at Twitter and PBS and Make-A-Wish, NewsHour, NASCAR, and many, many more. Today's episode will focus on creative inspiration, social media basics, data-driven marketing, and leadership. So it's a full slate. And if you're looking to learn how to keep your content and teams inspired and engaged, then you've absolutely come to the right place. Before we begin, I just want to make sure that we take a second to make sure our audience knows what to expect from the conversation and everyone's familiar with the features on the platform. First, this conversation is going to be about an hour long, and we'll include an interactive discussion with today's panelists for the first 40 minutes. So stick around because the last 20 minutes, we will be opening the floor for audience questions. And in terms of audience questions, there's a nice Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen that you can use to send in anything that you think of that you'd like James to answer. And it's also not too late to invite any of your colleagues or friends to join the presentation. Just send them the link that you should have gotten in the reminder email a little bit earlier today, and they should be good to go. And lastly, we're going to send out a copy of the presentation and the recording to everybody who registered. So finally, I'm excited to introduce our guest, James Gregson. James is the creative director of digital at LEGO Americas. He has over a decade of experience leading global cross-platform campaigns with brands like Svedka and Mercedes-Benz. James brings a unique knowledge of both the data-driven and creative sides of content marketing that inform his success as a digital strategist. Thank you for joining us today, James. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights with us. We've really been looking forward to this conversation. So let's just jump right into the first topic, which is creative inspiration. DJ, I know you had something that you wanted to say to kick it off, so I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Obviously, James, super pumped to have you here. And obviously in preparation for this, and something that we've always been familiar with here at Green Buzz is obviously LEGO's content. And for me, I think something's interesting about LEGO is that, consistently across the board, you guys take the ordinary and you like make it LEGO, whether it's figuratively or literally. Sometimes you guys literally take things and you make them into Legos. It's really, really cool. So I think the first thing that I want to hear about is, how does LEGO define its brand and how do you stay true exactly to who you are?
Yeah, great question. I'll just start off and say thanks for having me. I really appreciate this. It's always nice to step outside of my day-to-day and share a little bit about a company that I am absolutely proud to work for. Right, I think that's one of the biggest things that it is a pleasure and an honor to work for a brand that I had like my fondest childhood memories with spending hours and hours with. So to work for it, I think my 8-year-old self always likes to doesn't appreciate what I do on a day-to-day basis. Maybe my kids will once they're that age. So back to the question, and to answer it, I think Lego is obviously a historical brand, one that a lot of has touched a lot of consumers, right? And we have a pretty established sort of what is called a brand framework, right? Across that brand framework, we have everything from a mission, an aspiration, a partner promises, spirit, and values, right? So if I'm going to read that really basically, our mission is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. Our aspiration is to globalize and innovate the Lego system in play. Our spirit is only the best is good enough. And we have values across imagination, creativity, fun, learning, caring, quality. Right now, I think how that comes to fruition in digital content is hopefully pretty clear, and it should be pretty clear, right? That mission statement is of inspiring and developing the builders of tomorrow is, a foundation element to our content strategy, right? Everything should ladder up to that sort of lighthouse mission statement. And across our various digital touch points, Lego is sort of a loved brand. It's trusted and viewed as sort of being this high quality brand. So it's really important that our social content reflects that level of quality, right? At the same time, it's got to remain fun, authentic, and really, from my perspective, not feel like advertising.
Definitely. And I mean, on that same note about, serving all these different kinds of demographics, it's pretty clear to us that Lego appeals to so many different people all over the globe of every age and race and ethnicity. And it's one of these brands that really touches everybody all at once. How do you manage to tackle, so many different viewpoints and still resonate with people? Like when you have that large of a swath of demographics, how do you key in on those people?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I think, I used to work closely with someone who used to do PR, or moved on to do PR for the iPod back then. That's dating myself, right? And she used to talk about the fact that she spent most of her time, she would do PR for Apple iPod, right? And she used to talk about how the majority of her job was spent saying no to people, right? Because the iPod back then didn't need PR. It didn't need a publication, a PR or communications plan. It just needed to, be focused and sort of have an approach of less is more. So I think, to how we see it at Lego, right? There is no shortage of opportunities, right? In that speaks to, but that on the flip side, that speaks to how important it is for us to prioritize our efforts, right? We can very easily spread too thin and try being everything to everybody. And that from a creative standpoint is not an easy thing to do, and not something that I'd recommend to do. So, for us, it's being laser focused, right? From a creative objective standpoint, from a brief standpoint, it is very difficult to create a piece of content that serves everybody. And that's likely sort of an unrealistic goal. It's a lot easier to sort of be laser focused on an audience or a creative objective for a specific audience. And that's sort of how we approach it.
Yeah, well, that is a tough nut to dissect. It makes a lot of sense. You were saying, as you were introducing sort of your own affinity and affection for the brand you work for, which is always amazing, how fun it is. So that's built in and baked into the Lego identity. But can you talk a little bit, even on a tactical level, about when you and your team look at how to drive innovation and inspiration around keeping things fresh? What can that look like? Do you have activities that you guys do? Do you have sort of either a tactical or a strategic approach to saying, like, okay, everyone loves Lego, we're fun, we're so attainable, but like, how do we keep ourselves innovating from a creative standpoint?
Yeah, I think so. Speaking of that idea that there is no shortage of opportunities, right? I think from a leadership standpoint, right, we try to apply a 70-20-10 model, right? And that 70-20-10 model is applied. 70% is, doing their day-to-day like project-based work, the core of what they do. 20% of their time should be spent on innovation and proactive thinking, right? That's looking at trends, that's looking at, Reddit threads, that's getting really deep into social media culture and what's resonating, or into podcasts, whatever it is, and that other 10% is spent on personal or professional development, right? So it's creating that dedicated space and time. It's a tough thing to do. Certainly in this sort of remote working environment, it's really tough to do. We're all coming to grips of what a new routine looks like. So I think that's the first part of it. I think we have regular, like, so for example, we have a Teams chat, right, that is dedicated to across the globe for everyone that works across social creative, that we regularly share inspiration against, right? Someone just shared the sort of fake news rumor about the Xbox, the new Xbox, that's seemingly smoking, right? But that was all fake news, and that was based on a vape, right? And we were talking about like, how the hell do you plan against that as a brand, right? So I think it's about having a bit of a process and the tools in place to be able to constantly share. We have a Facebook group, a private Facebook group called Awesome Content, right? Just because, very simply, if you see something awesome on Facebook, it's really simple to just share it in that group. So it is sort of a little bit disparate, but we try and make it as easy to consistently share inspiration from across the board, wherever it may hit you.
That's awesome. Something really interesting I think you've said before, and I'm going to read it. You said, good content connects and great content converts. Can you walk us through that a little bit? Because I think it's fantastic, but I want people to hear a little bit behind, because it's a great tagline, but I want people to hear a little bit more behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's another fun buzzword on that, which talks about, content is king, context is queen. But I think the purpose around, I talk a lot about the fundamentals, right? The fundamentals of creative and the social media sort of marketing fundamentals. They haven't changed, right? Yet we always hear about how organic reach is dying, and Facebook and Instagram are the reach on those channels is evolving, and there are all these channels are pay to play, but the fundamentals of content creation and engaging with the consumer through digital channels has not changed, right? I think, when I talk about, good content connects and great content converts, I sort of talk about this idea that we want to create less advertising, right? We want to create less ads. If it looks like an ad, your audience isn't going to engage with it, right? But if it feels like great content, it has an opportunity to deliver on that objective, right? And that mention of conversion isn't always about driving a sale. That could be gaining a new follower, and that could be getting that content to be shared. Every piece of content has a different objective, but I think the difference between good and great content is that sort of balance between passive consumption and active engagement, or active sharing, or active clicking, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I was curious about, and I ask a lot of people who are in the creative fields, and it's something that I'm always thinking about, is, how do you personally find creative inspiration? And then in addition to that, when you have found it, how do you relay that inspiration to your team in a way that's like digestible for them? And I know you had mentioned that there's some websites and things that you use. Is there any other areas that you look at, books or podcasts, or, are you just kind of observing everyday things and bringing that into your work?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think, so we have some sort of leadership values or employee values at Lego that I think play into this really well, right? We talk about being brave, being curious, and being focused. I think the first two are probably the most important when you talk about sort of creative leadership and creativity as a whole. for better for worse, right? Personally, I am naturally curious, right? So I always talk about the fact that I may be listening to a podcast, that has nothing to do with work. It's, sports related, whatever it is. And they are, reading through their ad buy as part of that podcast. And I can't help but try and think about why is this ad buy good? Why is this ad buy bad? Does this make sense? God, podcast ads are terrible. Like whatever it is, I can't help but engage in that type of internal dialogue, right? I consume a great deal of YouTube content on a personal standpoint, and I'm always trying to understand why is this content being delivered to my homepage on YouTube, and thinking about how that impacts the type of stuff that I do professionally, right? At the same time, when I'm watching a YouTube video of a content creator, I'm thinking, why did I just stop watching that video? Like, what was it about that piece of content that made me switch off? Right. So I think it's that constant curiosity that one could argue is a blessing and a curse. I think from a creative standpoint, it's a blessing because I'm constantly thinking about the why, right? Even from a passive consumption standpoint, I think you can't force that on other people, right? From my team, I don't think that everyone doesn't work in the same way, that everyone doesn't process information in the same way. So I think you have to, create various ways in for various people, right? And I think, again, as COVID's impacted that, there's a handful of different ways that we sort of, or that I try and encourage, sort of that more passive consumption of inspiration.
Yeah. And I mean, it feels very similar for me where I had to kind of like train myself sometimes to be like, all right, I'm going to watch this as a fan. I'm just going to turn that part of my brain off that wants to analyze and dissect and figure out, oh, why did I just feel emotion there? Like you have to almost turn that off the first time you watch or listen to something and then come back to it again if you really like it and think that there was something special there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, I can't help but like I always do this, right? So I think a really good example is the complex Hot Ones
Yep.
interview series, right? And that speaks to just this idea of it's not. I'm just thinking of, wow, this is such a great concept, but the actual reality is it's just a celebrity interview concept flipped on a completely different format, creating a brand new piece of content. But that's how my mind goes, and I'm not watching it for work inspiration. I'm watching it because it's good content, but that's where my head goes for better or for worse. But that inspires sort of my creative process and what I try and sort of encourage my team to think about.
It makes a lot of sense. I think another thing that people are curious about, I think Lego you don't have missteps. You guys are pretty fantastic at what you do, but since you push the envelope and you guys look for inspiration and innovation to kind of do something, on brand, but also that kind of advances that good content for great conversion. Can you think of a time, an example maybe where you thought something was going to be amazing and then it kind of underperformed your expectations? And where does that fit in the culture of sort of learning and continuing to grow with how you innovate with your team?
Sure. I think I'll get a little tactical, right? I like to say that the example, if I was to go out and start my own business, right? If I was responsible for creating a business, you couldn't give me enough money to create a business responsible for creating organic content on traditional social, Facebook and Instagram anymore, right? Because it is so hit or miss because the platforms are going through such a tumultuous time. That's not to say that it's a big core part of what my team does. So I think, it's one of the things about being laser focused on what you're trying to learn, right? Test and learn is such a buzzy, overused terminology in marketing and in creative. But you've got to be very aligned and very focused on what you're trying to learn before you do it. Otherwise, you end up not learning anything. You just end up testing a bunch of things, right? I think it's that, and certainly with social, right? Social is and digital is so different to traditional creative, like creating TV commercials and out of home assets and that sort of, billboard. We have real-time access to data and performance metrics that can tell you what's good and what's bad very, very quickly. But you should be very, very focused on defining what good and bad looks like before you go through that process. Otherwise, what's good and bad gets, watered down very quickly because there's so many analytics tied to it. So I think, I'd less give you a physical example of something that we did that didn't perform well outside of, we are very laser focused on creative performance based on data, and that data should inform how we move forward with things, because that's what makes social creative and digital creative so exciting. There are handfuls of times where we're surprised by the data, right? And there's handfuls of reasons, subjective reasons, of why one piece of content performs better than the next. But I constantly say to my team, when we review performance of content, if someone says to me this content performed really well, that means nothing to me, right? It's benchmarking. It's having an understanding of did it perform better than the last post? Just some level of qualitative and quantitative is just so critically important.
Yeah, and that actually is it kind of very beautifully segues to our next section that we're going to be talking about, which is sort of data-driven marketing. And also this, with your brand equity being so high, and what you've already talked about is like, how do you stay true and you have the vision first and then you test and measure moving forward. Social media and the digital platforms and world have created a turnaround time on brand and marketing reactions that looks so different than even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So when you guys are looking at balancing sort of your drumbeat, your brand conversation, and then layering in being hyper relevant and also reactive to what's happening in real time, what's sort of, you've talked a little bit about like how you maintain your drumbeat, but what's sort of the philosophy there, and how do you balance it, and how reactive are you guys committed to being?
Yeah. I think I'll be honest in the sense that there's a lot of opinions on this one internally, right? I think there's a real balancing act to play, from the volume of the conversation, right? That's the first place you look at, right? When you're looking at reacting to a trend or a piece of news, you've got to look at a data-driven insight, right? That this conversation is reaching millions of people across the globe, right? That's maybe a first point of call. I think you've got to then review, does this align with the brand values of who we are, right? And I think there is, reacting to everything isn't going to create any value. Is there a strong reason why we should or why we shouldn't react to something, right? I can look at an example of, we reacted pretty quickly to globally to the Tesla Cybertruck announcement, right? And that got all sorts of press and all sorts of traction, and it was a little cheeky, and it was a little, poking fun at the hideous design of that thing. Sorry, anyone from Tesla. And there was a lot of internal dialogue of like, why did we do that? Should we have done that? It got celebrated externally and internally because of the organic reach of it and the amount of press that it drove and all that sort of stuff. I think that the reality is there just needs to be a dialogue, a conscious dialogue about it. I think there's a lot easier responses and reactive acknowledgements, right? So the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman, right? Black Panther and Marvel, that the universe is a big component to the Lego brand. So it just made sense that we reply, acknowledge, and celebrate that individual. But it's an ongoing dialogue, and there's no hard reason, yes or no, that we have. It's just making sure that we have that dialogue and that process. I think the biggest thing when I talk about reactive content is I always talk about the fact that everyone wants their Super Bowl moment, right? Everyone wants their Oreo Super Bowl moment. Everyone wants to go viral. Everyone wants that ocean spray TikTok example. But that's not a strategy, right? It's having the process and the resources to react to that as a potential. That's the only sort of strategy to there. So we always talk about, we have the process to react to content really quickly, and we have the processes in place to align on whether we do or do not do something. But having a concrete sort of formula of why we don't do something or why we do something, I think sometimes limits us. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into it.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Thanks for walking us through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's having the resources available to be nimble and agile when something happens in real time is it sounds like it can be a huge blessing or sometimes really complicate things. In your opinion, what's something that most brands get wrong when they think about their digital strategy as it pertains to social media? What's something that you see a lot? Because I'm sure there's not many examples of, it changes so frequently as to who's doing it really, really well and who's the great litmus test for like, oh, that's how you want to do it. But I see a lot more often like people not doing it so well. And what are things that you see as somebody who's an expert in this space that you think brands might be able to fix up or get better at?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I mean, I think, listen, I haven't always worked for a major global brand, right? I had my own digital consultancy before this, and I worked with tiny, sort of startup size, retail brands and, healthcare brands, right? Everyone's got a different scale and a different budget and a different objective and a different size audience and all those things. I think the biggest watch out is, I think there's a tendency to want to try everything, want to try every channel, want to, TikTok's massive rise. Everyone wants to go after that bright, shiny object. I've always said, you'd rather be really good at one thing versus being average at everything, right? And I think that speaks to this visual quite well, right? I'd rather pick one of those minifigures, i.e. one of those platforms, and really lean onto them based on an audience insight, that aligns best with brand X, whatever it is, or aligns with your audience, and be awesome at that rather than try and spread yourself too thin across multiple platforms, right? Because if you look across Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, to do all of those well, that's, millions of dollars, hundreds of pieces of content, like unique pieces of content across those platforms. And you'll lose your ROI quick.
And where in the Lego universe do you guys put most of your focus into, or do you feel like you have the resources to really tackle each one of those, new kind of mediums that comes out?
Yes. Okay. So I think, replying to what I just said, I think, listen, we have a very large disparate audience. We're spread audience across these platforms. And we, do have fairly large budgets, right? So I think we have a responsibility to be across all of the major platforms, right, that are listed here. I think when we have internal dialogues around platforms like TikTok or emerging platforms like that, we are absolutely hesitant for good reason to react and invest in those platforms because we don't know what the trajectory of those platforms are, right? We'd rather be focusing on the established platforms and be leaders across those platforms rather than leaning in and testing new potential platforms before they're established. And that is just a brand perspective. That's not to say that's the right perspective, but that is how we approach it.
Yeah, and I think there's also something too to for a brand like Lego, you don't need to be one of the first movers to say TikTok, right? you guys can take your time and let things play out a little bit more before you guys make a formal jump into it. So I think there's an element to that as well, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, there's I've heard it been sold as the other way, right? Like we want to be the first on those platforms and you get lauded for that. That's just not our MO. And I think, as I said, we much rather be the best on the established platforms rather than, chasing the bright shiny toy before they sort of establish themselves.
Sure. So it's interesting. Earlier, you talked a lot about kind of like this mission statement, this brand statement for Lego, and that kind of informs what you guys do as a creative team. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into, what are some of those pillars that you use as a social content team, right? That you guys kind of build your content off of? Are there these like base level building blocks that you guys use to kind of then go forward and create content?
Yeah, I mean, I do really think, listen, every good creative, right, has a good piece of creative has a good creative brief, right? I'm going to be very agency-esque, right? And I think it goes back to ensuring that we're delivering creative in support of a good creative brief and a good strategy, right? I think what you end up where I see teams getting into trouble from a creative standpoint is they're going based on their subjective opinion and their gut, rather than delivering content that is again based on that strategy and based on that brief. So I think it's just making sure that my team is really laser focused on not losing sight of the purpose of why we're being asked to create that content, right? Because I think, as I said, certainly being a broadly loved brand like Lego, it's very easy to lose sight of the purpose and the ask for that brief, and creating content because it's cool or because we think it'll resonate or those sort of things. I think I too often hear brands talking about brand marketers or marketers in general talking about going with their gut, or they know the brand best. I would challenge that and flip that and say I think that your gut can get you into a lot of trouble, because the content isn't for you. The content's for a different audience potentially. So yeah, that's something that I always make sure the team considers, right? I print out every brief that we get and make sure every single time I'm in a creative review that piece of content solves the brief.
That's can you talk a little bit more? You kind of brought up like the intersect point between the work your team's doing and earlier we were talking about all these different influencers within the Lego world, right? You guys are not an island unto yourself. You work as a much larger brand team. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like as we're talking about reach and strategy, how does that partnership work? How much of it drives from you? How much of it is a collaboration within other teams? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think we're a little unique, although I think this is happening across major brands more and more, right? So the social media creative department is part of our internal creative agency, and our primary stakeholders, or my team's primary stakeholder, are the brand marketing team, right? The brand marketing team have a responsibility to do a number of things, but at a very basic level, is to drive sales, and grow brand affinity, right? So we work collaboratively across what I would say reactive opportunities, and proactive opportunities. And by that I mean, we may see a consumer insight that's really interesting about, I'm going to try and not use a specific one that we may be leaning into next year. We may see something, as a proactive opportunity that the creative department has identified. We'll bring that to our marketing department, who, wink, wink, has the media budget as well, and say, hey, we've got this opportunity. We see this as a really interesting potential creative opportunity. Let's partner on this and figure out a way that we can bring this to life, to serve sales, to serve your brand objectives or sort of your KPIs, but also do something that's awesome creatively. That's one way of looking at it. I think the larger part of the work is we've got, product X launching. We want to, drive awareness for it. What does that look like? These are the audiences. This is probably the channel mix. This is the purpose of the product. Now go and come up with a creative idea to solve those problems. That's honestly, the way it works. And it needs to be a collaborative effort, because I think there's marketing strategy, there's creative strategy, and those two components really need to mold well together to come up with a great piece of sort of creative campaign.
Sure.
And in relation to, creating some of this content, whether it's topical or whether it's evergreen, do you see, like, just on a broad level, when you look at the analytics, maybe this is something you guys haven't, really like done an A/B on, maybe you have, like, do you find that evergreen content has advantages over topical content? Like, do you see their performance differences or anything like that?
I mean, listen, the organic content performance is always a surprising thing, right? I think that's where it's very important in the creative critiquing process to say, to not say, I don't like that, or I don't think that looks right, because I'm not the audience all the time, right? So I think it's really important not to get caught up on what you, even as a creative leader, deem good or bad, right? And I think I share this example all the time. We have a piece of content, that received, I think, 8% over our benchmark engagement rate on Facebook, for example, and it was not a good piece of creative. It was user generated content that we reshared, and it wasn't a great image. It was a photo album of a life-size build. It was bad. It wasn't good, right? But the process had already been taken, and instead of me saying to my creative team, I don't think this is going to work. Let's not do this. I very quietly in my head thought to myself, this is going to tank. This is not a good piece of creative. But it was one post of 8 different posts that we were doing. And I've been proven wrong many times. And guess what? The data proves you wrong often. It's not, other people. And sure enough, that creative piece of content performed better than a lot of the other high polished, high production, expensive pieces of content that we had created. And this one was the free thing that we got from a fan. But it's about having that dialogue after the fact, right? And telling my team that I had this thought and that I didn't want to put the kibosh on something. I wanted to, be proven wrong or be proven right by the data. And sure enough, I was proven wrong. And it's having that dialogue and that process around it. I think, data is both an ally and a foe, but you need it, it's the most important part of our job. Right? We can say something we can say we've got this great piece of content, but if no one sees it, no one engages with it, who cares?
Right. I think that's really interesting. And it kind of ties into what you were talking about earlier when you were saying about, data and analytics do to some extent kind of drive your creative process and your production, which is very, very interesting. And I guess, well, do you want to make a point off of that, or?
No, I mean, it is true. And as I said, I think it can balance, that's not to limit creativity. I think I don't want to make it sound like, everything we do is based on data, and we only lean into, creative formats because they've worked well. You can apply that test and learn mentality, to try and prove that method wrong. Where I get frustrated is if we keep on doing it, you keep on doing the same thing, expecting it to tell us something different, but the data doesn't. It's telling us that it's not working. That's where, we have to be reactive to the data. But go ahead, sorry.
No, and I think that's a great point. I'm happy you spoke up. I think something else too, I'm thinking of, a lot of the people here manage brands, they're involved in brands, they're involved in looking at analytics. Can you talk about maybe one analytic that maybe in your opinion you feel is a little too overhyped? maybe one that you feel gets a little bit too much love out there that you think people shouldn't feel like they need to live or die on? I know that's a tough question to ask for a specific,
It's a tough question.
but is there one that you can think of that sometimes you look at and you think, you know what, I'm not going to feel crushed by that right now?
I mean, this is a cheap one, right? Because it's no one should be surprised with this, right? It's the number of followers you have on social. No one cares about how many followers you have, apart from your CMO. I get it. Your CMO definitely cares about how many followers you are, because they're looking against other brands and seeing that as the determinative value. I think I would flip that question a little bit, and I think we love to get tripped up by the data, and I think coming not from a traditional creative background, I've always worked on the more strategy and data driven part of digital marketing. And having my own business as well, right? I had to prove what I was doing across digital marketing to smaller businesses who were paying me out of their pocket every month on retainer. I had to prove what I was doing, otherwise they wouldn't keep on paying me, right? The only way you do that is by the data. So I think going back to it, there is no one metric that people should be relying on to determine success. On the flip side of that, every single campaign, every single asset that you publish should have a single performance metric that you determine what helps define what good and bad looks like, right? I think, as I said, talking about data as a an ally or a foe, there's so much data, and there's so much data that can end up watering down what is good and what is bad, and then we end up working with an advertising agency or a media agency that is hellbent on obviously determining, selling everything that they do as a success. You, as a creative department, from my perspective, need to define what you believe is good and bad from a singular KPI standpoint, right? And every asset has a different objective, right? So an asset that has a link to shop should have a very different benchmark, performance benchmark than an awareness or a piece of content that is supposed to drive engagement, right? That engagement asset should have an engagement rate as a pinnacle KPI, and that shop asset should have something like click-through rate or conversion rate as the pinnacle KPI. Anything more granular than that, and you'll lose your mind, from my perspective.
Talking a little bit more about, you were talking about your work with small businesses when you were in the agency field. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people who are tuning in today, there's a broad range of they work for larger brands, but they may be parts of smaller teams or smaller brands. If you were to give advice and say, listen, if you're going to do one thing with your time and one thing with your money, if you're part of a smaller team and you're limited, do you have sort of like this is the first thing you should do, or your top tip for people who are trying to, increase engagement and, quality of output?
No, I don't. I would say that, but I say that, being genuine, right? That there isn't a silver bullet, and oh, see, I might not have it right. There you go. Someone thought I was speaking to her, my device. So there isn't a silver bullet, right? And I think anyone that tells you there is a silver bullet of what you should be doing is maybe trying to get your business, because they're really good at doing that. Sorry. You've got to test, you've got to try different things out, right? And across platforms, across, content formats, as I said, I think it's being laser focused is really, really important. It's so easy in this world with so many platforms, so many different audiences, so many different content types to spread yourself too thin. Really focus on a creative format, whether that's long form video, whether that's a podcast, whether that's, Instagram content, whatever it might be, and try that out. For how long is up to you, but give yourself, what you deem is a sufficient length of time to test something out and see how it goes. Be really strict with yourself about the performance, and what you'll define as good versus bad. yeah, that's the best way to approach it. There is no one thing that I would say, do this. There just isn't. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it.
Well, I think now would be a great time to transition over to the Q&A. I saw 2 questions come in, and for those of you with us, it's not too late to keep adding questions to the Q&A. So don't forget, there's that tool at the bottom of the Zoom window that you can use to ask questions. But the first question I pulled, and I think you've addressed this a little bit, but I'll just throw it out there in case you wanted to add anything additional. Niles asked, as well as licensing, collaborating with other brands for Lego, do you ever work creatively with their marketing teams? If you could talk a bit about what that looks like.
In terms of Lego marketing teams, I assume that was
I would
related
presume,
to?
yeah, internal.
Yeah. They are, for lack of a better, they are our customer, right? We are there to deliver content and creative campaigns in response to a regional, global, but a marketing level problem, right? Or challenge. So absolutely, they're a critical part of our, we say team, but they are a separate team. They are our partner. And I think we need to make them look good, just like you would in a traditional sort of customer or client agency relationship. The difference is that they're down the halls when we used to work in an office.
Yeah.
And we're all working remotely, right? So that gives a great opportunity to sort of to work collaboratively, right, across that. It's a lot less, church and state in that sense, and I think that's what gives us a competitive advantage a lot of times, because we're able to. They're not going to fire us, for one, right? There's not that fear. Sorry, agency people. But we can walk down the halls and ask about this audience challenge and identify what we could deem as a proactive opportunity, and you can have that genuine dialogue. As I said, that I think puts us at a competitive advantage.
Right. And thank you, Niles. We have another question here from Dana, I believe. Would love to hear more on content strategies for subsets of large demographics. It's so easy to create content that aims for everybody, but we know that doesn't resonate with people and bring people back. How specifically does his team approach creating content journeys for smaller audiences?
Yeah, I think you have to be objective driven, right? You have to try and define the purpose of your content, right? What is that content or that content strategy or that content format? What is that supposed to incite in that audience or audiences, right? Is it passive consumption? Is it, increase in brand affinity? Is it, traffic, website traffic growth? I totally agree with you, right? You can't deliver content to everybody, right? And it won't resonate with everyone, right? I talk about affinities as a very basic level, right? You have various, for us, we have various brand affinities. We have high affinity, medium affinity, low to no affinity, right? And one piece of content will not resonate across all those affinity gaps, right? So I think you've just got to be conscious, laser focused about what the purpose of that content is and that audience that you're trying to reach. That'll help, I guess, to some extent, prove whether that content is good or that content strategy is effective or not. Yeah, it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like we have another question here from Sasha. What do you find is the best tactic, aside from data, to convert any concern or pushback around creative risk with the insight that you have that a campaign is meant to happen?
I mean, it's that test and learn mentality in my head, right? You can get bogged down in the data, right? You can get bogged down in the, maybe this will work, maybe this won't work. But I think to some extent you have to risk, you have to try something out, based on an insight, hopefully based on, something else worked previously, or you saw another brand do this and you believe it could work for your audience, or, something like that, more so than trusting your gut, from my personal opinion. You know, but make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to learn or what you're trying to prove, and how that tactic can help prove either positively or negatively what you were trying to prove.
Well, and risk typically means you're pushing the envelope and you're trying new things,
Yes.
you're trying to grow and learn. So I don't think you can ever fully get away from risk or, you know, ease anyone's full concern, no matter who your stakeholder or your client is. But if you do have, like you're saying, this testing mentality, then you can constantly compare what you're doing to see if you're headed in the right direction or if you're moving further away from where you want to be. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
A little bit more on the data question. We have a question from John, who says, you mentioned being data driven. How do you more specifically measure the impact of reviews and referrals, online word of mouth, in terms of conversion to sales, aside from just general correlation?
The reviews, yeah. It's tough, right? You know, I think consumer reviews has reached quite a pinnacle point, of, you know, being a real, you know, influencing the purchasing decision. You know, for better or for worse, right? I think we all go to Amazon and look at look at the reviews, and then I think anyone that's in the know all understand that the validity of those reviews are soft. It's maybe the best term. I don't want to say they're all fake, but they could be all fake. You know, I think in some cases, there's not much you can do, right? I think there's a lot of challenges to reviews, certainly on major platforms like, you know, Yelp and like Amazon. I think you also have to assume that the average shopper, or more than the majority of the average shopper, are keen and aware of those influences, and do, because there's so much information out there and because there's so much product information out there, that they're doing that research and making that conscious shopping decision. Yeah, there isn't a solution to it, would be my best answer to it. Sorry.
All right, we have another question here from Daniela. She says, I love the fact that one of your key objectives is to inspire future builders. I was wondering, do you measure your impact in terms of inspiring future builders? If so, and how?
Yep, definitely. We talk about new customers all the time, right? New customers is the number one, is a huge objective. I think then on the flip side of that, retention, like retaining those new customers, right? So, you know, we have plenty of data that points to, you know, whether you've bought a Lego set in the last 12 months, and we want people to buy Lego sets all the time, every month. So yes, I think at a basic level, we're looking to get new customers who haven't bought a Lego set before. Who would have thought those people exist? I'm teasing. But also then retain them, right? I think that's, for us, is really important, is to retain those customers and build them into, you know, high affinity fans that are customers for a very long time. And, you know, anecdotally, I think that's what we've seen as a result of COVID. You know, COVID's had a really positive effect on that new customer base, because everyone's got this, you know, new amount of free time, and Lego is nicely positioned to fill that.
And I mean, I would assume, you know, as you travel across the world, James, if you start to see Lego shaped buildings or things like that, then you'll know you're definitely having an impact.
Sure. Yes.
It's another way to measure it. We have one last question from Ben. Yeah. So there's a couple questions within this question, so I might just throw them to you one at a time. How much of your content strategy breaks down into sub campaigns for adults and kids?
The vast majority of our content is for adults, right? Social is a plus 13 platform. We don't market to kids. Of course, we do have some owned Lego digital channels in Lego Life and Lego.com, where some of our content obviously has an extension that can resonate with kids as well. But we're very specific about that, right? Like, while our content may resonate for kids, certainly on social, it is designed for parents, shoppers, adults. Obviously there is, overlap there because it at its core, historically, it was a kid's toy that has massively evolved, right? I don't think you're getting, or maybe you are, but I don't think these, the massive, the Friends Lego set, for example, right? The Friends Central Perk Lego set is not for a kid, right? It's just not. If it is, that'd be kind of weird, but maybe there are kids out there that are Friends fans at this point. So, we have products specifically for adults, and the content that we do deliver on social is for parents, shoppers, and adults. So.
And the second part of that question was how much time and effort is spent cross-connecting these audiences to reach families from different communication vectors?
Yeah, so I think we talk about the lovely acronym of OESP: owned, earned, shared. I can't remember the other ones now. But we have, we have a digital ecosystem, at Lego where, we're trying to touch consumers at various digital touch points with the same sort of content in some cases, or different content. So not one audience is the same, right? Nor is one platform. So I think we're conscious of trying to make sure that we're delivering the right content to the right audiences on their sort of their own digital platform. But the owned Lego ecosystem is a really important element to us, right? When we talk about evolving the Lego brand from beyond being just a toy company, right, to being an experience company, right, in the same way that Apple is, right? And you want that same high level brand experience to be felt across, going into a Lego brand retail store, into going to, into opening, unboxing a Lego set.
Right. Well, one last question snuck in here, and I think it's a really good one, so I wanted to throw it your way before we sign off here today. Have you seen any challenges in staying relevant to a quickly maturing generation of children, 9 to 13, who transition early to gaming platforms and turn away from hands-on building? That question was from Jethro.
Yes, we do, definitely. I think, philosophically, right, our toy, like our product, is a physical thing. It's a thing you build, right? But digitization has evolved and taken on a life of its own in terms of how kids consume anything, right? Video games, social media, YouTube, whatever it might be. So I think we've got a little bit of a philosophical challenge there, right, about how we bridge that gap. I think on the flip side of that, you look at the pervasiveness of digital, that we can't ignore it, right? So we've got everything from having digital building instructions to having a digital experience to the physical product is really important. I think for us, outside of video games, outside of movies and TV shows, we don't want to take away the physicality of the brick, right? You never want to take that away. And I think if you flip that in its head, it talks to the importance of how, and maybe why Lego has been successful is because it is a physical thing, right? In a world where parents are trying, I hope, and I assume, and the data points to this, although maybe the sales doesn't, parents want kids to play less video games, I would assume, and watch less TV and watch less YouTube. So, certainly a nice angle for that, and one that we certainly try to lean into is, open-ended creativity, physical building experiences. There's so much value to this and what the product can bring you and what the experience can bring you, we believe the brand's well positioned for, even in a world of digital pervasiveness, to be that opportunity while not ignoring digital as a whole.
Right. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thanks also for stopping by. We hope you guys had fun and learned a couple of things along the way. And stay tuned for our December event calendar to keep up with our upcoming webinars and conversations. And also feel free to check out, as I mentioned earlier, greenbuzzagency.com/blog to see any of the on-demand recordings that we have there. And again, James, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. We got a lot of great questions answered today. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who joined in.
All right. Thanks, guys.